hoping to achieve within the Nigerian space, if not the West African space, was to make high quality information so available and so accessible.
Hello, viewers. Welcome to another episode of the Nanaya Yabua podcast. Today, I'm in the studio with David Hundeyin. I thought the H was silent. David is a Nigerian journalist, author, founder of the West African Weekly, a Substract newsletter. He is a TED speaker, a 2-time or 3-time TED speaker. You've won multiple awards, and he is on the global stage as an investigative journalist whose work I have had the pleasure of reading. An author of 3 books.
I don't know. I don't know what the response is in truth. So you're gonna have to forgive
Okay,
me.
welcome to the podcast.
Yeah.
How have you been?
Well, as you can see, alive and well.
Great. So we're going to deliberate on a few issues of both in context of Nigeria to West Africa and the world. But for me, keenly is that why does story matter to you?
Who said this exactly? I think it might have been Chimamanda Adichie. It might not. It might also not have been her, but a very prominent author once said something along the lines of, "Stories are the most powerful things in human society. Um, Human behavior, human culture, human accomplishments, human government, basically everything that defines what humanity is guided by a set of stories, right? So, uh, when a in 20th century, for example, when a country decided that it was going to organize itself along certain principles. So this one says it's capitalist, and this one says no, it's communist. This other one says it's fascist. All these things which led to some of the biggest events in modern human history. These things were entirely the product of stories. So in the case of fascism in the 1930s in Germany, the story that was told was that there was some set of people that was responsible for the economic state that Germany was in. And because that story was told so successfully, it was told so well, and it resonated so deeply, that's what led to the rise of Nazism in Germany, which directly led to the Second World War, which has shaped so much of the world that we live in. Without that Second World War, even the modern continent of Africa would look very different.
Yes.
Because the independence, the success of the independent movements across Africa was heavily influenced by the outcome of the Second World War, because as a result of the war, that the great European powers were so weakened that they could no longer hold on to the African colonies. Right? But all of this boiled down to a story that one man dreamt up inside his head in Berlin in the 1920s in Germany. That's how powerful stories can be. Why did so many people have to die during the second half of the 20th century?
Yeah.
During what was known as the Cold War, even though it wasn't really cold, it was very much a hot war for the people who were involved. The two major powers obviously didn't have any conflict on their own territory, so maybe for them it was a Cold War. But for those of us in Africa, for example, it was very much a hot war. Because Africa hosted more Cold War theaters than any other continent in the world, which most people don't seem to realize. Right? Why did that happen? If you draw the line back far enough, it's because once upon a time there was a man called Karl Marx, who sat down one day, had a story in his head, and he wrote out that story on a paper. And that story became the basis for what we now know today as communism, right? Rise of communism.
Is it the Communist Manifesto?
Exactly. And the rise of communism as a counterbalance to capitalism. Capitalism itself was also, at least in part, the result of a story told by some man called Joseph Smith, who also sat down and wrote a story, The Wealth of Nations. Right. So the biggest events in human history are basically the result of stories. So, which means that whoever tells stories is one of the
Yes.
most powerful people on the planet.
Thank you.
So
The
that's
pen
my
is mightier than the sword.
exactly.
Yes, 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 yes. You know what? I forgot myself a little bit is that when I start you, I better keep up.
Yeah.
Now we'll go back to our African concept of story, and that's a proverb. Until the lion begins to tell its own narrative, the narrative will forever glorify the hunter. So, in a sense, that is the premise of this podcast as well, that we as Africans or Blacks, both here and in the diaspora, back home and in the diaspora, for us to have some of these critical conversations to tell the story of where we want Africa to head. And that is why I reached out to you, because I know you are a beautiful storyteller, an investigative storyteller. And sometimes when I was reading your book, I thought it was just coming out of an action flick or something. And all these things really happened. I wish we would have more time to delve into some of these experiences. So let's start with your first book, Conflicts for Jihad. Is that that's the first one, right?
So technically, it wasn't a book.
Uh,
It was actually an article, but
Art.
it was really long. So yeah.
Okay. So let's start with Conflicts for Jihad, because that also woke a lot of people up, and it brought to the fore that many of us don't like to do research, or are the idea that if you want to hide something from a Black person, put it in a book. This time put a price tag on it, and then we will not pay, so we won't pay to go look for it. What was the what influenced you to go to write Conflicts for Jihad in the first place?
So I'm not sure how familiar you are with the internal political situation of Nigeria, but for many years, it had been like this um, ding dong issue that the quote unquote sponsors of Boko Haram will be exposed someday, you know,
Okay.
and everyone who is in and around government talks about this issue as if these people who are sponsors of Boko Haram, they're mythical creatures who float in the sky or something. And it's like, no, these people exist. They're
Mm-hmm.
real,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a supply chain, and these
Mm-hmm.
people are identifiable. On at least one occasion, there was a foreign government, I believe the United Arab Emirates, publicly announced that it had sent a list of Nigerian terror funders to the Nigerian
Mm-hmm.
government, and it was the Nigerian government's prerogative to put that list out, and the
And
Nigerian
follow
government
up.
sat on it, right? So it came almost like, so that, and by the way, that's partly what led to
Mm-hmm.
the current diplomatic impasse between Nigeria and the UAE, where if you have a Nigerian passport, if you're traveling with a Nigerian passport, the UAE does not issue you entry clearance. They just don't. Right?
Oh, is
Yeah,
that what happened with the airline situation?
it's part of it.
Part of it. Part
Part
of
of it.
it. Yes.
So when so this was about, I think, 4 or 5 months after I had started up West Africa Weekly.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, West Africa Weekly is no longer a Substack newsletter. It's now a website in its own right. But at
Oh,
the time, yeah, at the time when it started, it was a Substack newsletter.
okay.
And this was about 4 or 5 months after I had started in earnest. And
Mm-hmm.
when I was starting it, what I expressly decided was that this was going to be the place where the stories that nobody else wants to touch in our sub-region, I'm the one who's going to do them. This is where they're going to be hosted. It was a
And
very
thank
deliberate
you.
choice.
Thank you for doing that. Continue.
Yeah. So I felt as if, a lot of the journalism that takes place in not just in Nigeria but across West Africa, it's very stilted.
And gossipy.
Yeah, it's very very it has limits. It has these sort of self-imposed barriers that it does not cross.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't, I mean, I've spent a lot of time in Ghana, so I kind of familiar with how it is in Ghana. It mimics, like there's a lot of engagement. There's a people speak to MPs on live radio and stuff, and there's a lot of, it looks like there's a lot of freedom of speech and whatnot, but there are certain places it does not get to.
The questioning, the
Exactly.
type of questioning is
Exactly.
effaced. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. Even that semblance of freedom that exists in Ghana, we really don't have it. We really do not. So the Nigerian government is almost like an emperor that just sort of sits and looks down on you from a great height, and there's no, you can't ask questions. There's nothing you can do, right?
Yes.
So when I was starting out West Africa Weekly, I decided that this was going to be the Nigerian government's nightmare, right? Wherever there's a story that needs to be told, people need to hear, and for whatever reason, the mainstream media is not covering it. This is where people expressly said out. I decided at the outset that the forbidden kind of journalism in Nigeria, that's where I want to host it. This is where it's going to be. And there are going to be no holds barred. There's nobody's going to be safe. Like everything is going to be on the table. That was what I decided. So I actually had a list of topics that I wanted to explore, forbidden topics. And one of those topics was, who funds Boko Haram? Where did Boko Haram come from? Who is actually behind this thing? Because the story that was often told was almost like it was a very fanciful story. It's just that nobody ever questioned it. The story that was told was that there was one guy called Muhammad Yusuf who led a radical Islamic sect. And obviously there are several of such sects, right? So, but it was presented as if one day, for some reason, this sect just, for no real reason, this sect just decided to turn violent, pick up arms against the government. And then the response of the police was to go after them. They shot Mohammed Yusuf dead, which is true. That actually happened. And that it was as a result of the heavy-handed crackdown that his followers then morphed into something else. And then they went to Chad and they bought arms, and then it became this full-blown insurgency starting in 2011, and then the rest is history. Which always struck me as a very Hollywood type of storyline. Because the truth is that, like, the sects that Muhammad Yusuf led, there are maybe 100 of such sects across Nigeria, across multiple religions. In fact, Nigeria is a society where there are so many of these groups, so many. Some are foreign, some are local, so many, right? The vast majority of them never, ever pick up arms against the government. And even if they do, what kind of arms do they even have? Like the type of funding pipeline that these people would have had to be able to get hold of military grade equipment and sustain an insurgency against the government long before there was ever any affiliation with Al Qaeda or whatever. What is going on here? So that always struck me as there was definitely something that didn't smell right. So when I sort of started putting the pieces together was when I got hold. So the context here was that in that same year, a few months before, when I was still with Newswire, I had done a story on a Nigerian minister called Isa Pantami. Now, Isa Pantami, is a religious extremist, a very well-known, Islamic extremist, and I was the one who had dragged his hidden past into the limelight. So he had tried to sort of rebrand himself and suppress a lot of things he had said previously, being that a lot of those things that happened were in the pre-internet era. So most people simply didn't know it. So if you weren't in Bauchi in 2006, you probably wouldn't know who Isa Pantami is.
Okay.
So, but this was 2021, and a lot of those things have found their way into these little silos on the internet where nobody knew where to find them. But that was my job, right? I knew where to find stuff.
I love that.
So I dragged this thing out, and as a direct result of that, because this man had designs of running for presidency and whatnot. As a result of that, his political career ended. Right. So even though the then president refused to fire him, but it became accepted that everybody knows who this man is. And this man has no shot politically. Even up till now, his political career is over. It's done. Right. So as a direct result of that story, I started getting the sense that there is a much bigger ecosystem that this man exists. within.
Mm.
And it's a very powerful and well-funded ecosystem. This is not just some accidental explosion driven by just what's it called? Just religious extremism
Mm-hmm.
and passion. No, there's an international angle to this. There's something much bigger going on here. I didn't really know what that something was, but I was determined to find out. So when the thing started coming together was when I got hold of the document in 2006 that was sent by the Nigerian Foreign Ministry to the UN Counterterrorism Committee,
Mm-hmm.
where these names and events were mentioned in black and white. Information that was not given to the Nigerian public. This was it didn't go into any newspaper, TV station, radio discussion, nothing. This information was heavily suppressed in Nigeria. But the Nigerian government essentially sent a secret memo to the UN Counterterrorism Committee naming very prominent, very well-known religious figures in Nigeria who had actually been arrested by the Nigerian secret police for involvement in plotting Islamic violence as far back as 2002, right? But again,
Whoa.
this was the pre-internet era, so again, if you weren't in the security ecosystem, you wouldn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And bear in mind that back then, because there was no internet. I mean, so you guys in Ghana were quite fortunate compared to us. As far back as 99, 2000, you guys already had GSM. Had
Mm-hmm.
We didn't get those things till we had our first a nationwide GSM provider in 2002, right? Mobile internet didn't really become a thing in Nigeria till maybe like 2004.
This conversation we having with Boko Haram and destabilization in Nigeria, that brings to the question, like, if Nigeria is destabilized, who benefits?
So there are two answers to that question. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll start with the local end of that question. So locally, who benefits? Well, almost nobody locally, because the vast if Nigeria were to be completely destabilized in a manner that is similar to like DRC or
Mm-hmm.
Somalia,
Yeah.
there will be almost no winners locally. And when I say locally, I don't just mean in Nigeria, I mean in the West and Central African sub-region.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody would really be better off for it. Not any of Nigeria's neighbors, up to and including Ghana. It would be a problem for everybody in that neighborhood.
For that one is very sure.
Yeah, it would be a problem
Mm-hmm.
for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But who would benefit locally? I think there would be a number of people who would spring up and create fiefdoms within the space that was previously known as Nigeria. So
Mm-hmm.
one thing that I think is common knowledge is that if Nigeria were to devolve into chaos for whatever reason,
Mm-hmm.
unlike the DRC, it would not remain one united country. It would definitely splinter into
Yeah.
different pseudo countries,
Yes.
almost certainly. So kind of
Yeah.
like what happened between so there's Somalia, there's
And
Somaliland.
Somaliland. Yes.
That would happen, but on a bigger scale in Nigeria.
Yeah.
It will not be one or two. It will be five or
Yeah.
six, right? So
Mm.
there would be warlords who would arise. There would be
Mm-hmm.
fiefdoms.
Mm-hmm.
So arguably, so in the north, for example, those who have designs of creating some Islamic caliphate or whatever,
Yes.
some of those kinds of warlords would arise there, who would
Yeah.
command vast amounts of territory, north, potentially even in the middle belt. In the
Mm-hmm.
south, there will be warlords who, obviously, due to the presence of exportable resources like oil,
Mm-hmm.
would be able to establish some sort of power base. Because again,
Mm-hmm.
the international market is agnostic to who is or isn't in power. As long as
Mm-hmm.
there are resources and there is some sort of framework with which to buy those resources, they will buy. So
Mm-hmm.
till today, Libya doesn't have a functional government, but
But
oil is still sold from Libya, and
yes.
someone still pockets the money, someone still benefits. So there will be such a scenario in
Mm-hmm.
the southern half of Nigeria. Now, internationally, who would benefit? This is where I think the question is has a new level of importance, because
Yeah.
in the using Libya as a microcosm, as an example, who benefited from Libya falling into total and absolute chaos?
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I'm not even saying that Libya was necessarily better off, being governed by Muammar Gaddafi because he was a problem in his own right, even for neighboring countries. He was a problem, right? But definitely the chaos that Libya has fallen into since the fall of Gaddafi implies that certainly the state of the country now is definitely not preferable to what it was before. So, who has benefited from the chaos that Libya is in now? I would say internationally, first of all, you have to look at those who have benefited economically. So, the oil companies, for example, they are definitely having a good time because any big international entity which buys raw materials from a poor non-industrial entity is always at a huge advantage. They
Yeah.
get to dictate the price that they will pay for whatever it is that they're getting, and they have a much stronger bargaining position. So, and arguably, I mean, I don't want to go into the realms of conspiracy theory here, but arguably, you could even argue that the continued violence, the continued conflict in Libya, like this is more than 10
Yeah.
years since the fall of Gaddafi, and
That's right.
there's no end in sight, right?
Yeah.
You could argue that some of these international players are actively fueling that because the weaker that entity continues to be, the greater their advantage continues to be. They have a huge
Yeah.
trading advantage. So using that as an example, you could say that there will be international entities, international oil companies, foreign governments that would benefit greatly from Nigeria falling into like the state of an ungoverned space. Because
Yes.
we know that there's crude oil in Nigeria, but Nigeria actually has a lot of other things apart from crude oil that most people aren't even aware of. You know,
Yes.
Nigeria has some of those rare earth minerals that
Yes.
people kill themselves over in the DRC. They are
Yes.
in Nigeria. They are. They are not being exploited at the scale that they are in the
In
DRC,
DRC.
but they're there, right? They're almost like most of the major sort of conflict resources, conflict minerals you can think of. They
Yes.
exist in quantum in Nigeria. Is it gold? Yes, in
Yes.
large quantities in Nigeria. Right. So in Ghana, it's very well known. There's a gold mining industry. It's formalized. In Nigeria, it's
Yeah.
not for gold exists in similar quantities, but it's not formalized. It's just mined illegally. Right. However, because Nigeria continues to present the semblance of a state, the semblance of a stable quote unquote country, there is a limit to how much illegality that you can carry out there. There's a limit because on some level you still have to engage and interact with a government. It might not be the most functional government in the world, but it's still a government. It still exists. If
Well,
Nigeria fall into that chaos, you would have DRC multiplied by 10.
For that one, being a Ghanaian right across and having lived in Nigeria, I would say I beg you guys. Because the fallout is going to have a serious impact all the way on the West African, North Africa
Yeah,
coast. In fact, the world. We're all
absolutely.
going to pay a heavy price for that. It
Absolutely.
wouldn't be an African problem, it will be a world problem.
This
It
was
will be.
exactly what I told the UK Parliament last year because I was asked to testify for an all-party parliamentary group report, and I told them point blank that Nigeria is two national borders and one Mediterranean crossing away from Europe. So whatever is a problem for Nigeria's West African neighbors is a problem for you guys as well.
Yes,
Because
yes.
if 100 million plus people can no longer stay in one space and they need to go elsewhere, they will go in all directions. And
Directions, yeah.
so if you cross the border from Nigeria into Chad or Niger, there
Mm-hmm.
is only one border effectively separating them from Europe. Because once you
Yes.
cross into Chad or Niger, the only thing separating you from Europe is Algeria or Libya. And once
Mm-hmm.
you get to the coast, is literally 128 kilometers to cross from Libya or from
Yeah.
Algeria to Lampedusa or Calais or any of those places
Yes.
off the coast of Europe. You're in Italy, you're in France, that's it. So essentially, whatever it is, whatever funny business you guys have going on in Africa, you better sort yourselves out because
Yeah.
if you create a situation where West Africa falls into chaos, it's not going to be contained in West Africa. You
In
can't
West
contain.
Africa. Yes, yes. It's similar to Liberia and Sierra Leone. it's a devastating war that occurred, and it crossed all over into Ghana. I don't
Yeah.
know much about Nigeria, but its effect is still, Then we tend to ask, why is Africa the way it is? Is it a fact that we are multi-ethnic, multi-faith, and multicultural? Or it is a fact that all those things are being exploited by outside forces? I am of opinion of exploitation, because divide and conquer, it's very easy when you have all these multi-faiths and multi-ethnic and cultures trying to coexist. At least Ghana, I know we kind of have some form of a coexistence, but not so much of some form in Nigeria as well. Correct me there.
Well, so the first thing I have to say is that whatever it is that Ghana did that ensured that you guys have this sort of relatively cohesive national identity that you do, you should never let go of it. It's one
I,
of the biggest assets
I
that
will
Ghana
tell you
has.
this: Ghanaians love to talk, but we are afraid of bloodshed.
I mean, it's not as if Nigerians love bloodshed either. But the
Where are we
problem, I
going?
don't I don't know what it is that I think it was maybe during the independence era there was a when Nigeria went right, Ghana went left, and clearly whatever it was that Ghana did worked because I mean I've lived a significant chunk of my life in Ghana, so I think I'm
Mhm,
qualified to say this. Being Ghanaian actually means something to Ghanaians. The identity
mhm.
actually comes with a certain amount of it has real meaning for them. So let me give you a very small example of what I mean. This might not sound like something major, but for me, it absolutely blew my mind. So sometime in 20,
It's a good idea to get an outside perspective, because
yes,
sometimes we sitting in it don't know or don't see the value of
yeah,
what we have until we get another perspective.
yeah. So sometime in 2021, I went to the National Theatre in Accra. I think
Hmm.
it's on is it Liberia Road or
Something like that.
yeah.
National Theater,
So
yeah.
yeah, so there was a play that was on. The play was called "The Story of Us." It was a story about Ghana's journey as
Hmm.
from colonial to independence, right?
Hmm.
And I think about an hour or so into the play, where it got to the point where Ghana gained independence, and then on
Hmm.
stage the Union Jack was being lowered, and the
Hmm.
Ghanaian flag was going up.
Hmm.
I could feel goosebumps on my
Mm.
because what happened was nobody was asked to do it. The Ghanaian
Yeah.
anthem started playing, and all around me, every one by one, everybody started getting up, just getting up and standing at attention. No one asked them to do it. Was just seeing their flag and hearing the anthem. Everyone responded to that instinctively. Let me tell you, that would never happen in Nigeria.
Do you
That would
think,
never happen in Nigeria.
the national anthem, we refer to Ghana as Ama Ghana, Mother Ghana.
Other Ghana, yeah.
And Nigerian anthem is patriotic, paternalistic.
I don't know. Maybe that's what it is. I don't
I-
know, or maybe that's one of the things. But and maybe it's also the fact that apparently more than 70% of Ghana, for whatever reason, speaks a variant of the Akan
Akan.
language.
Yes, yes.
So there is actually, the lines between national identity and ethnic identity are actually blurred
Mm-hmm,
in Ghana,
mm-hmm,
right? Because
mm-hmm.
if you meet a Ghanaian anywhere in the world, there's a chance that if you speak Tree, the person's gonna reply to you in Tree, right? There's a very good chance
Yes.
that that's going to happen. In Nigeria, not so much.
Mm, mm.
So in Nigeria, in Ghana, there's a clearly dominant ethnic identity. In
Mm-hmm.
Nigeria, there are like three or four or five competing identities of
Identities.
almost equal size.
Yes,
So
yes,
that's a
yes.
problem, right? So, but be that as it may, I think so. If you had asked me the question 2 or 3 years ago, that who is responsible for this
Mm-hmm.
state of disunity?
Or who benefits
Yeah. If
from
you
the
had
destabilization? Yeah.
if you had asked me 2 or 3 years ago, my answer would have skewed overwhelmingly toward the local side of things. I would have
Mm-hmm.
said they're local bad actors, and this is who is responsible, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's not so much that answer has changed because they are still very much, regardless of anything that is happening, the people who are most immediately responsible are the local actors. They are responsible. However, my perspective has also broadened a bit since then because I've also come to understand that those local actors, a lot of the time, are not even acting on their own volition.
They are puppets.
Literally. So, and I think when this became the most evident, like that except you are deaf and blind, there's no way you can't see this, was last year after the coup in Niger,
Mm-hmm.
when the new Nigerian government, led by what's the
Tinubu.
Bola Tinubu, for some apparently inexplicable reason, decided that the way to respond to a bloodless coup where nobody died, a
Was to go
bloodless
shed blood.
a bloodless coup that the people on the streets, people of Niger were on the streets celebrating and siding with the coup regime, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where ideally, what you would have done in that situation is you would have just released a generic statement urging return to democracy. The new military regime should put in a timeline for elections. That's what you should have done. You should have counted your blessings because there was no bloodshed. The country didn't fall into chaos, which means that border with Libya, which is
Mm-hmm.
the gateway to chaos, that border remains
Mm-hmm.
relatively secure, which means you
Mm-hmm.
don't have more problems to deal with in Nigeria. You should have
Mm-hmm.
taken that as a win. Instead, it was completely incomprehensible. Started, secretly deploying the Nigerian military to go invade Niger without Senate approval, which is illegal. Like, what is going on? And then
Whoa.
and then impose all kinds of crippling sanctions against it. Like, there are levels of sanctions, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are some types of sanctions you're not supposed to impose until maybe like this country has committed an unforgivable act of war against you. So,
Mm-hmm.
for example, Nigeria and Niger have a treaty because they both share the Niger River.
The
So,
Niger River.
yeah,
Yeah.
so they have a treaty that Niger is not allowed to dam its own portion of the Niger River because Nigeria already has a dam, and in return, Nigeria supplies electricity to Niger. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Nigeria goes and switches off power supply to Niger.
Then we also dam it.
But by the way, they are constructing a dam as we speak now. The Nigerians are constructing their dam, which is a direct fallout of this thing that happened last year.
So which will cripple Nigeria?
It's going to be a problem down the line. It definitely is going to be a problem. So you violated a treaty unilaterally. They shut off their electricity. By the way, people died because they had children in incubators and hospitals. These children died.
Oh, goodness gracious.
You closed because the largest border that Nigeria has is the border with Nigeria. There's a lot of trade that happens across that border. You closed the border, and Nigeria is a landlocked country. So without access to borders, they can't trade. Right? They don't have access to the sea. You close
Yes.
your border with them, making it almost impossible for them to gain access to food staples
Mm-hmm.
that they depend, medicine, fuel. You made life extremely difficult, not for the military regime, but for the regular people on the streets. They were the ones who died, right? You slammed on all these sanctions. You tried to invade them illegally. It got to the point where even the Nigerian military started, like people within the Nigerian military started leaking these official orders to journalists, which was how I got hold of the official order ordering the Nigerian military to go enforce a no-fly zone in Niger, which is a fancy way of saying Air Force should go and strike targets in Niger. So I actually published that thing when I got hold of it, and then I got accused of treason. You've leaked I leaked the locations of soldiers. I was responsible for compromising an ECOWAS security mission, and then because they got to find out that I was living in Ghana, I was living under asylum protection in Ghana. Then they met with the Ghanaian government to get the Ghanaian government to revoke my Ghanaian passport. Also, so they tried to get me extradited to Nigeria to face trial for treason.
Oh, I don't
You know,
think that would ever happen.
but so the point I'm making here is
Yes.
why on earth would Nigeria do that to Niger? These are two of the friendliest countries in the region. Niger is like Nigeria's 37th state. The two countries have such a historically close relationship. They've collaborated joint military missions to fight Boko Haram. The border between both of them is not really a demarcated border. It's a border that exists notionally. It's not a
Yeah.
real border, right? The people on both sides are the same people. They speak the same languages. It's like Ghana going to war with Cote d'Ivoire. Have you ever heard of something so stupid?
It doesn't make sense. Or Ghana
You know,
going to war with Togo. It doesn't
why?
make
Why?
sense.
Why? Ghana fighting with Burkina Faso. Why? For what reason? You know. So what that told me very clearly was that this thing, which by the way did not benefit Nigeria in any way, this thing was foreign instigated. Somebody in Paris gave instructions to someone
Do
in Abuja
this.
telling them to do this. Because from a
Yes.
Nigerian point of view, there was actually nothing to gain from those actions. It's not as if it's a selfish local actor who just wanted to do something at the expense of everybody else. Even locally, there was nothing to gain. So in the end, when, if you recall, a few weeks ago, when these sanctions were then removed completely, when we then sat back and took stock of everything, it was a net loss for both of us. So there's a trading relationship worth, I forget the exact figures, but hundreds of millions of dollars across the border, right? Nigerian businessmen who are the beneficiaries, the net beneficiaries of this trade,
Lost.
they've lost tens of millions of dollars, right? The Niger River, the Kenji Dam, this is the
Yeah.
Nigerian dam, Niger River. In a few years' time, there's every possibility that it's going to be out of commission because the Nigerians are building their own Kandaji Dam. Now,
Yes.
that's going to be a problem for us, not just for hydropower, not just for electricity, but even for irrigation. It's going to be a
Yeah.
problem. That's something we've not even dealt with now. That's a problem we're going to face in 4, 5, 6 years time, right?
In,
The when we the Nigerians they placed a ban on all air traffic that passes over the airspace that is going to Nigeria or originating from Nigeria. If you look
yeah.
at the map of West Africa, Nigeria's entire northern border is basically Niger.
Niger. Yes.
So it got to the point where international flights going to Europe or Asia from or to
Cannot.
Nigeria, you couldn't fly through Nigerian airspace. So you from Nigeria, you'd have to go west, detour through Mali and Burkina Faso, which adds an extra 3,000 kilometers to the trip, which basically doubles your ticket price. You have to go west and detour before you then get to Algeria and continue going. Or if you're going to Asia, you have to detour through Chad, the Central African Republic, before continue on your way. So
You
in the
know,
end, we lost out. So what was the point of all of this loss? It becomes very obvious that there's a foreign actor who was actually trying to accomplish a foreign policy goal. So that just made it so obvious that there are foreign actors who actively meddle in African affairs, who actively meddle in African politics and African local and foreign policy in ways that are not beneficial to
to
Africans.
Africans. Yes. Breaking Point.
Yes.
Yes. Can you give us a brief overview about Breaking Point and what the book is about and why you decided to write Breaking Point? God,
So my
I
first
loved it, by the way.
I'm glad you did. So my first book, which was the Jungle
Yeah.
was an anthology of some of my more important stories from the first half of my career. That
Hmm.
that was the Jungle. Now, Breaking Point, I wanted it because the problem I had with the Jungle was that so I
Oh,
didn't come up with the idea
or
for
let's
the
talk
Jungle.
about the jungle and then go to Breaking Point.
Well, yeah, because
Because
both of them are interconnected, right? So
yeah.
the issue with Breaking Point was that it was my publisher's idea.
Mm-hmm.
So my publisher had this idea that you have all these amazing stories that you've done,
Mm-hmm.
combine them, combine them into this book, and it's going to, it's going to be good for you, right? So that's what I did. But I felt as if even though each story is a good read and it
Mm-hmm.
tells important stories, each story is like a chapter standalone. I felt
Yeah.
as if there wasn't a narrative that connected all of them. It
Mm-hmm.
was just standalone stories. So with Breaking Point, what I set out to do was also include some of the stories that I had done, but tell connecting stories between them
Mm-hmm.
to let people understand the wider context of these stories and what
Mm-hmm.
was also happening in my own personal life while I was doing these stories. Because I think that's a side of investigative journalism that never
Mm-hmm.
gets told, right?
Yes.
So the journalist almost seems like a robot or like Superman, right? In reality, the journalist goes through a lot when doing these things because if you decide to be a full contact investigative journalist in a place like Africa, the day you do it, the day you begin, is the day you have essentially signed your death warrant. You have you have accepted that I know I'm going to die one day, and I don't know when. So between now and whenever that unknown death is coming, this is I want to spend my time doing something that I think is important enough to be worth my life, right? So, but people don't understand the kind of toll that that takes on you, and the experiences that come along the way, the sacrifices that you have to make while you're doing these things. Because I think when people just read the story, they get lost in the sensation of it. Wow, this is amazing. I didn't know this before. And then, especially given that the way I write my stories, I write them for effect. So I don't just want to pass across the information. I want to make sure you understand it. So I write it it's almost like a novel when you're reading the story. Each article that I write, it's almost like a
Mm-hmm.
novel. Like it's written in such a way as to be engaging. So I have a career, a degree in creative writing, which
Okay.
I'm sure you know. So
Yes.
this is where I deploy what I learned at university, basically. So people read that and it's just like wow, amazing. But I with breaking points, I was trying to sort of give them a wider context that this is
Mm-hmm.
not just about wow, it's amazing, this is a great story. This is the wider story of what was happening both in my life and in the world when
Yeah.
this story was being told, and this is why this story was important. So um with breaking
I
points, so I started off the book with um, the account of what led me into exile in the first place, because I think that was like the best place to start the story. Why I started the story there is even though before I left Nigeria, I was already doing some very important work,
mm-hmm.
including work that led me to win the 2020 People's Journalism Prize for Africa before I left Nigeria. It was after I left Nigeria that I think some of my most hard hitting stuff actually took place for many reasons. First of all, because I didn't have that constraint of they're coming to arrest me if I write this, so I knew I could do anything at this point.
Yeah.
Secondly, I had a grudge. I felt like these people have taken my home away from me. Because
Mm-hmm.
bear in mind that Nigeria wasn't when I was in Nigeria, I wasn't trying to leave. I wasn't
Yeah.
suffering. I had a very
We're
comfortable life.
forced.
Yeah, I was literally forced to leave. Right, I
Mm-hmm.
went into exile and I had to claim asylum. In fact, if you read the book, at the point when I left Nigeria, I was so comfortable that I didn't even have any valid visas in my passport at the time. So
Yes.
when I had to leave at short notice, the only place I could go was somewhere within the ECOWAS region.
Yes. Yes.
In Ghana. Two of my siblings went to university in Ghana.
Oh.
Then there's been Ghana has always been like my second home anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I chose to start the story. To let
Mm-hmm.
people understand the context of what happened in October 2020 during the NSARS
The answers.
protest,
Yeah.
the Lekki massacre that effectively ended the protest,
Yes.
and what happened in the immediate aftermath. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where I started the story from. And then moving into 2021, at that point I was at my lowest. I was I would say I was depressed, but I was really down psychologically because in the space of 2 3 months I had lost everything that I had ever had, that I'd ever worked for. I was
Yeah.
living in one random Airbnb in a place called Akwetema in
Akwete
Achimota,
man. Yes.
in Achimota, right? Like I was just sort of, and then I caught COVID, so I was down for like a week. Like it felt everything that could go wrong went wrong.
Went wrong.
My,
Yes.
my girlfriend back in Nigeria, she dumped me. She like it was just body blow after body blow. Like when
I
it rains,
know.
it pours. Right?
I read that. I laughed a little bit, but I felt the pain
Yeah,
in the book. I felt the pain in it, and it's like, oh, sorry,
yeah.
Bele.
And then I was like financially, I was down and out. Like it was
Yeah.
really, really bad. And then the sort of, if you like, the divine bailout that
Mm-hmm.
arrived out of nowhere when I was awarded the People's Journalism Prize for Africa, and then the cash prize that came with it, and then
Yes.
all of a sudden, out of nowhere, someone then brings a story. At this point, I had kind of given up on investigative journalism.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, this isn't mentioned in the book. When I left Nigeria, I had actually written a column, like a business day column, where the title of the column was goodbye investigative journalism. It was good while it lasted. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I had actually written a public, like I publicly dissociated
Farewell.
myself, like a
Yes.
public farewell that I'm done. Like
Mm-hmm.
this, I'm tired, And why I
Mm-hmm.
was tired at the time was it felt as if whatever I write, you people aren't even getting the point of this thing.
Yes.
You people are reading it as an interesting story, and then you now start arguments about the person who wrote it. It becomes a discussion about the
Not the
person behind the
content.
story, and not the content of the story. What is this? So I was like, I'm done. And then in March 2021, when someone then brought the story to me from Cote d'Ivoire about the
Oh, yes. Human
Nigerian lady,
trafficking.
yeah, the human trafficking story from Cote d'Ivoire, and then
Mm-hmm.
specifically the Nigerian lady Itunu blah, 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 who was
Yeah.
locked in a prison in Bondoku in
Mm-hmm.
Cote d'Ivoire. And then the adventure bug, if you like, beat me again, and I wanted to do this again. So then I just did, right? So that's chapter 3 when I went off to Cote d'Ivoire, and
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't legally allowed to travel because
Yes.
I hadn't come into Ghana legally in the first
Mm-hmm.
place. I had done an irregular border crossing, and then at the time because of COVID, all the borders were closed, so you couldn't
Yeah.
cross from Ghana to Cote d'Ivoire anyway. So I
So,
then had to.
so you know what? We won't call it an irregular. We'll call it a traditional. Those times when our ancestors used to move from one place to the other
Yeah,
without these so-called borders. You
yeah,
did one of those and
yeah,
came to
exactly.
Nigeria. Sorry,
Sure.
continue.
So then I had to enter, the border crossing between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire is the river. I think it's called the Tano River.
Tano,
Yeah.
yes.
So I had to get into a canoe and
Mm-hmm.
cross to get to the
Yes,
Ivorian side, and I get a tricycle to the park, and then from
yes,
there get into a vehicle to Abidjan. Then I
yeah.
made a mistake when I got to Abidjan, and I lost my tablet and my
Uh,
phone,
yes.
and that wasn't
As
fun.
as soon as I read that part, my hands just went to my head. Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness! Oh my
So because that was my first attempt at so okay, something else I should mention, my sort of hero, my role model, whom I would end
goodness.
up meeting later on, my hero in journalism was
Hmm.
Anas Aramaya Anas, who's a
Oh,
Ghanaian journalist, right? So that was my first attempt at trying to be like Anas, you know
yes,
trying to do a field investigation, and I
yes.
just thoroughly messed it up, like thoroughly messed it up. Like how can you make that kind of mistake? I felt really bad, but I managed to salvage it, and a story
Mm-hmm.
actually came out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it seemed as if something positive is going to come out of all of this, the Nigerian government did what it does. After I had brought attention to the story of Itunu, and by the way, it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't just Itunu, there are other Nigerian girls who were in prison
Right
for no
there,
reason,
yeah.
and the Nigerian government didn't do anything. And eventually she died there. And
Oh,
that I mean, that really messed with me psychologically. That really, really messed with me, you know. So going into chapter 5, that was I think the most difficult chapter to write in the whole book,
mm-hmm.
because that was the I think of all the things that happened to me throughout that entire 3-year period, that was the most difficult thing. When I got into a relationship which very, very rapidly became a marriage, and it was like the biggest mistake
In
I ever.
Ghana.
Yeah, she was Nigerian, but yeah, I was in Ghana at the time. It's chapter 5, so the chapter is called Okija Woman. I didn't want to use her name because
Yes,
I didn't want her to be identified, because then it comes across like I'm trying to instigate the world against one
yes.
person. So I didn't mention her name, but she's from a village called Okija in Nigeria. So
Mm-hmm.
which is why I call that Okija Woman. Right. So it was a sort of this thing they call a whirlwind romance. That's what it was. It went from 0 to 100 really fast, really quickly. What I didn't realize was that um, there's a thing called love bombing.
Love bombing.
Yeah, when people who have this sort of narcissistic personality disorder, they know how to push your buttons, and
Mm.
they know how to get their claws into your soul.
Mm.
They know how to get you to
For
make
this one,
decisions.
you are teaching me.
Yeah, they know how to get you to make decisions that you wouldn't normally even make. So, for example, if you just met someone less than 12 hours ago, why on
Mm-hmm.
earth are you
Will you
agreeing to marry?
say?
Why on earth are you doing that?
They take all the boxes.
Yeah, they know they know which buttons to push, and they know how
Mm,
to convince you that after everything that has happened to you, you are the luckiest person in the world because
to have them.
you've met your person. Like
Mm.
you've met the person who is like your exact psychological profile
I
fit.
get you. I
Yeah.
understand you. I'm there for you. You're ride or die. Okay.
And a few weeks in, or
Red,
yeah, literally a few weeks in, you
red
then have
flags.
this very horrible realization that what the hell have I gotten myself into? And very conveniently, she made it such that at that point it was almost impossible to get out, because at that point you're no longer just a boyfriend and girlfriend which you can end at any time. You're then at that point a traditional wedding had taken place in Nigeria, so in the eyes of both families this
You
is man
are
and wife. So even though it happened before the court wedding in Accra, a traditional wedding had already happened in
in
Lagos. So
Nigeria.
you
Mm.
can't just walk away. So then the court wedding actually happened. And the day before the court wedding, she broke my nose.
Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, all of this is in the book. So clearly, maybe
What?
you haven't read chapter
So
5.
I had the one on Kindle before you sent
Right, right.
the new one. So I was already past. So maybe I didn't see that in Kindle.
It's on the Kindle version as well. It's chapter
It's on
5.
the Kindle.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have to go reread it.
In fact,
Maybe.
the pictures are also there. The pictures of like the teeth marks in my arm and the glasses that got broken when they were on my face. So you see the frame all twisted. That happened when they were on my face. She punched me and it was, oh my God. She was physically abusive in a way that I have never experienced with any human being before.
Sorry.
Like she used to bite, she used to kick, she used to scratch, she used to headbutt, she used to spit. There was not no kind of
No.
violence.
So I think this person has an undiagnosed psychological problem.
Oh, it wasn't undiagnosed. It was very much diagnosed. But both she and her family didn't think that it was important information that I needed to know until
Oh,
afterwards. So it's then afterwards you then realize
entrapment.
that there is something called borderline personality disorder,
Yes.
BPD, and she has been diagnosed of this thing more than once. And they kept it. In fact, there's a popular psychiatric hospital in Lagos. It's called the Federal Neuropsychiatric Hospital in Yaba. It's popularly known as Yaba Left. Right? She had actually been sectioned there twice, but for whatever,
There is a Salam Down in Ghana too,
yeah.
or Pantan.
Yeah. Funny enough, Pantang is mentioned in that story as well because I ended up during one of our episodes, I ended up having to take her to the OPD at Pantang because the flat I was living in at the time in Accra was in Abokobi, which is very close to
Yes.
Pantang. So we
Mm-hmm.
actually ended up taking her to that Pantang psychiatric department there. So yeah, that was like the worst time of my life. This was 2021 going into 2022. I was
Too.
31
Yeah.
at the time, and that was an awful time. And the funny thing about all of this is that while this was happening, I was still working. I was still producing. So when I wrote conflicts for Jihad, actually,
Yeah.
was the month when she left Ghana and she returned to Lagos because I couldn't sort of live with her anymore. And
Yeah.
both families decided that she needs to go back to Lagos and get some help.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So she
Mm-hmm.
left, I think it was September 3, 2021, she went back to Lagos and I started working on conflicts for Jihad on September 6. Like I started drafting it. I've been working on it for months, but I started
Yeah.
drafting it on September
Yes.
6th. And I ended up
Wow.
releasing it later in the month. So that was like the background. So that's kind of like it's a recurring theme across the
Mm-hmm.
book, across Breaking Point, that here is the story that you remember. Here's the story that I told. Right.
Yes.
Here's what was released on West Africa
Mm-hmm.
Week. Now here is the preceding chapter or the chapter after is now the context of what was happening before or after or even during the story. So for example,
Yes.
story that I did after conflicts for jihad. No, before conflicts for jihad, I think, which was a story about the passport shortage in Nigeria and
Yes.
who was behind it. The fact that there's a known indicted cocaine trafficker who has the contract to print Nigeria's passports, right? um, what people wouldn't have known unless they read the book was that because of that story, till today, half of my family doesn't talk to me because the person who was the deputy controller general of immigration during the period that this person was given the contract, that person happens to share a surname with me. It's my uncle. And what I didn't know was that, well, what I didn't think about or consider was that if this person, who is a known cocaine trafficker, got this contract at so and so time, and your uncle was in charge, there's every possibility that
Your
your uncle
uncle
is
knew.
actually in business with this, not just new, but is actually in business with this person. This Your uncle could be a silent partner in this business arrangement, which, by the way, is exactly what turned out to be the case.
And you
So
exposed everybody.
oh yeah, so before the story was published, I put out a video trailer that was
Mm-hmm.
teasing what the story was going to be about. The next thing I knew was I saw a call on my phone coming in. I saw the caller ID. This is a man who hasn't called me in years
Oh
before,
yeah.
and I see the caller ID, and I answer the call, and he starts telling me how I can't publish that story, yada yada yada. He starts going on and on and on about how am I sure that what I'm saying is even true? Have I verified it? Yada yada yada. I'm like, dude, are you asking a journalist has he verified this story? What kind of like what is this? You've
And
never called me
particularly
before.
you.
I didn't even know that you had my number. You've never called me before. I only have your
Yeah.
number because it's from the family group chat. I've
Yes.
never spoken like this before. All of a sudden, you're calling me, and what is this? Long and short, he tells me that I shouldn't publish a story, and that anything I want to publish, I have to run it through him first. I'm like, okay, cool. I end the call. I go to the Substack backend, and I hit publish. And then a few minutes later, the phone starts ringing again, and I just look at him again. Yeah, I'm not answering that call.
Ignore. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
these are the stories that don't get told. These are the
Yes.
contextual details which people don't get to hear. But I was determined that people this story will be told finally, which is why how Breaking Point finally ended was when I told the
Mm-hmm.
story of what happened last year
Yeah.
when I was in Ghana, and the Nigerian intelligence is the agency authority Nigerian intelligence agency NIA, they actually sent operatives,
Into
spies
Ghana.
to Accra to look for me, right? And the according to my source, the purpose was to illegally extradite me. In practice, how these things happen in Nigeria is that whether they illegally extradite you or not, if they find you, something's going to happen to you. So if they don't get you onto the plane to take you home, but they manage to physically get you, then you're probably going to die, right? So that's the situation I was in when I would the court. This was the same source who passed across the document to me, the document showing the
Yes.
order to deploy the military into Niger, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so I'd been taking a nap, and I just woke up. I just come out of the shower actually. So I woke up, took a shower. I came out of the shower. I unlocked my phone, and there was a message on Twitter, and it was this guy telling me, "Don't sleep in Ghana. Like they're
Jackpot.
they're coming like now,
Quickly.
now, now, now. They're coming for you now. Like don't spend the night there." Like and he didn't tell me this, but like I deduced very quickly that it wouldn't
Yeah.
even be safe to even leave Ghana through the airport.
Yes.
I deduced that very quickly. That who knows whether they have someone at the airport.
Probably.
So I got a vehicle going to Aflao, and I crossed into Togo, and I actually flew from Togo. So all the like the details of all of this are in the book. People should read it actually because yeah, it was a whole thing. And so I ended up going to Kenya for a while to lay low for a while. And yeah, that was where the story finally concluded. That was where the final part of everything I did last year. That's where I did it. That's where the FOIA case against Bola Tinubu in
Yes.
US,
Yes.
that's where it got
Yes.
concluded. The
Yes. Yes.
the Chicago State University case, that's
Yes.
also where so all of that I was running all of that from Nairobi.
From
Yeah.
Kenya. Yeah. Wow. Wow. Man, it seems you live in the how do we call it, Hollywood lifestyle of investigative journalism, but it is also very dangerous. It
Extremely
is
very much.
it, it is yes. more because even as you speaking, and I'm thinking safety in Ghana, but there's actually no safety anywhere.
That's
There's
the
no
issue.
yes, there's no safety anywhere, and you've dedicated your life to telling these stories, to bringing these atrocities to life. And so every time that, or every day you live, is actually a blessing to us. What I hope and pray is that we take serious note of this, that for Nigeria, for Ghana, for the whole West African sub-region to be stable, to move forward, we need to listen to the critical narratives of people just like yourself. It was for those that have not, are unaware. I was listening to one of your interviews, and you made a very salient point about patterns in history, and particularly Nigerian history, with the history of bombing. Do you remember that
Giving a speech last year at the CNI UK conference in London.
Yes, I
Yes,
think that is what I was listening to. And
yes.
I would like for you to actually hone in on that, because that conversation, when I listen to it, sums the nature of the possible implosion of Nigeria and its, you know, if its after effect on West Africa and the how do we call it? The continent, or the world. Because
The point I was trying to make was that there is a sort of there's a political and economic elite in Nigeria whose central guiding ethos is, as we say in pidgin, nothing they happen. They believe that everything today is going to be tomorrow is going to be exactly like today and probably a bit
Mhm,
like yesterday. Nothing will ever change. So the behavior that they have always exhibited doesn't need to change
mhm,
because nothing they happen. They
mm,
genuinely believe that they have figured out Nigeria to an extent where they can be confident that everything is always going to be the way it is. So, in other words, whether Nigeria works for the majority of people or not, currently we know it doesn't, but it works for a few. And those few, they believe that it's going to continue like this forever. So as long as I can maintain myself among these few, I and those important to me will be fine.
mhm,
Now, using that bombing thing as a case in point, I was making the point that once upon a time, if you had said that there will come a time when suicide bombings or suicide bombers in Nigeria would ever be a thing, you'd have been looked at like you're absolutely insane.
mhm,
That's the same way that they look at people who say that Nigeria is someday going to implode. They look at them like they're absolutely insane.
mhm.
That what's like, do you know what they're talking about at all? Do you know how many years we have done this and done that? Do you know, which nonsense are you talking about? That's the
Mhm,
same way I would have looked at you in 2007 if you had told me that there will be a Nigerian bomber, or there will be Nigerian bombers, suicide bombers who
mhm,
would strap explosives to themselves and walk into a restaurant
mhm,
somewhere in Nigeria and then blow like. What, do you think this is Basra in Iraq or something? Do you think
mhm,
Nigerians are Arabs? We don't
mhm,
have that kind of mentality here. No, of course not.
mhm,
We love our lives too much. We're jolly people. That was
mhm,
the whole thing. In fact, at the time, stand-up comedians used to use the idea of a Nigerian suicide bomber as a premise for jokes because it was hilarious. The idea of a
mhm.
Nigerian strapping explosives to themselves and blowing up. The idea was absolutely hilarious.
Because we love life.
Exactly. It was absolutely hilarious. It's like imagine someone making that kind of claim about Ghana now. Someone saying that someday it's become a regular thing for a Ghanaian named Kweku to strap explosives and then walk into his chop bar and explode. What?
That's very far-fetched. Yes,
Exactly. It's the way it sounds incomprehensible to you now is
yes,
the exact way it sounded
yes.
incomprehensible to us in 2007.
Mhm,
But then I think in 2010 it happened for the first time. The so-called
mhm.
underpants bomber
Yeah.
was Farouk Abdul Mutala,
Mhm,
and even at that point, we kind of found ways to rationalize it that this dude is a weirdo. He comes from a very rich family. He didn't
mhm,
really grow up in Nigeria. He spent a lot of his time in Sudan. He's not really one
mhm,
of us. we were still making jokes about it. I remember I was in university then. There was a Facebook video that I watched where this was the early days of skit making, right? These skit
Mm-hmm.
makers were making a skit about it, and they were like that the US government shouldn't do anything to him. They shouldn't harm a hair on his body, and they should just hand him over to us. And we want to just give him
Yes.
one or two small acupuncture. We're making jokes about it. It was hilarious to us. Just this idea. In fact, the only
Yeah.
thing we're concerned about is that let these idiots not create the idea that Nigerians are
At
exploiting,
suicide.
because we want our visas, please. We want to travel. We want to make money, please. We don't, you know.
That's true.
But then
Mm-hmm.
it kept happening. It didn't stop with him. And
Mm-hmm.
then, so in his case, we could rationalize it. It happened in Amsterdam. This guy he's not one of us. This new sequence of suicide bombings started happening
Mm-hmm.
in Nigeria. It happened in Gadaka, it happened in Damaturu, happened in Jos, happened in Maiduguri, then it happened in Abuja, which is the capital, the UN building in Abuja. I think
Yeah.
27 people died or something. And then it became very clear that, okay, this is not a joke anymore. Like in front of our eyes, in the space of about between 2010 and 2012 was 2 years, 24 months.
Yeah.
In the space of 24 months, our entire worldview changed.
Wow.
In uh, January 2010, the concept of a Nigerian suicide bomber was completely fanciful, hilarious to us. We were making jokes about it on Facebook. By December 2012, it was something that was in the headlines every other day. That a woman wearing a hijab walked into strapped explosives and walked into a church somewhere and 13 people died. It became a
Yeah.
regular thing, right?
Yeah.
And the point I was making with that example was that's how shifts happen. That's how things change. That no
Yes.
matter how incomprehensible it seems to you that Nigeria can implode, it can and it will.
Well, yeah.
So it doesn't matter how long Nigeria has worked a certain way and you think you figured it out and it's never going to change. When it happens, it's not something that's going to take decades to happen. When it happens in weeks and months.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's similar to the Orange Revolution.
exactly. So
Yeah.
the sequence of events that led to suicide bombing becoming a regular thing in Nigeria, that sequence of events didn't take 2 years. It was decades, right? So across those decades, people thought nothing is going to happen.
Yeah.
But then when it started manifesting, it was months. So
Yes.
similarly, the sequence of events that is pointing towards a sort of socio-economic catastrophe in Nigeria. This sequence started in the arguably as far back as the 60s, arguably.
Yeah.
And Nigeria still exists in some form. So it's like, well, this country is always going to be there. Nigerians just like to talk, just like to make noise. Everybody will be fine. But guess what? When that breakdown of basic um, national existence starts
Mm-hmm.
to happen, because currently it's basically force that keeps Nigeria together. It's the Nigerian military that
Mm-hmm.
makes Nigeria exist in its current form. Without that, there are already so many armed non-state actors around the country. There's already so much death. As at 2022, I think Nigeria was listed as the world's number 3 country in conflict death. And there isn't even a declared war happening in Nigeria. And yet, Nigeria was number 3 in world global conflict death as at 2022. I'm not sure what the numbers are for 2023. It's probably even more. So when eventually that explosion happens, it's going to be short and quick and disastrous. So hopefully the people who like, because sometimes I feel really frustrated. I feel like I'm an outsider who is just reading the signs and nobody else can see it. Hopefully the people who are in power, hopefully it's almost never going to happen, I'm sure, but hopefully they get the message that things can and will change. And when they do, it's not going to be good news for you.
As we speaking this morning before this conversation, I was reading. I is it the Vanguard, and on the naira devaluation, and certain countries, I think Benin and other countries, not refuse to take the naira in exchange for goods and services, and rather go for the safer, because the naira is really nothing now. So and when I read that, I said, oh my goodness, that is an economic disaster.
Yeah.
It is
I
an
mean,
economic.
like presently where I am, I can't think of. There are a few people I knew who, even after moving, they were still running their businesses in Nigeria or doing remote jobs or whatever. Now everyone I know is just like they're just like, what's the point? They've left. They're letting go of stuff because there's if you make a 1 million naira in revenue in Nigeria now, and you want to sort of bring that here, how much is that going to get you?
Nothing.
Maybe I don't know, £600 or something. That's it. Maybe that'll be enough to pay your bills for that month. That's a 1 million naira. It's not easier now to make a 1 million naira than it was in 2010. It's not easier to make 1 million naira in Nigeria now than it was 14 years ago. The amount of effort remains the same or even more, but the value has absolutely cratered. So, what is the point? So, I know people, business owners in Nigeria who have staff, 10, 15, 20 people on payroll in Nigeria who are here right now and they're looking for jobs. They're submitting their CVs because it's like it's not even worth it anymore. What is the point? Like, if I'm running my business in Nigeria and I'm paying myself 1.2 million naira a month. Once upon a time in Nigeria, that would have been utopia, right? You would have been able to send your kids to great schools. Your family would travel on holiday. You would have a great time. Now, what are you going to do with that? It's just absolutely pointless. And yes, the amount of effort remains the same or even more. So it's like it doesn't really make sense anymore.
Well, as we said, that the signs are all on the are out there, because it appears that with this is an increased destitution, and when you have a country of youth, a country whose majority are youth, who don't see that, these grandfathers and grandmothers sitting on the wealth are taking them anywhere. Well, I think West Africa is already redefining itself, and very soon all the old vanguards are going to be retired to wherever they need to be retired. At least that's my opinion. That's my opinion. But you've been on the ground and you are the one behind, and you see things maybe clearer than I see. So,
I mean, yeah, we definitely hope for that to happen. What gives me some measure of optimism now is some of the events we're seeing taking place
in Senegal.
in the
Okay.
Sahel, and
Yeah.
in francophone West Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Where
Mm-hmm.
even though well, it might maybe the anglophones for once we are the ones who are being left behind,
Mm-hmm.
which is a nice change for once.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the francophones who for decades have been the sleepy ones who basically nothing ever happens and nothing ever changes. These changes are happening so rapidly, nobody saw them coming.
Uh,
I certainly didn't see them coming. So
you know what? I think it's just one of those things that we just spoke about, that they've been brewing. At
they
least
have,
Thomas Sankara made a face out
yeah,
and was eradicated.
yeah,
So these sentiments are what Sankara already put out there.
yeah.
That it was just slowly brewing,
I
and
think
then
what
we
has changed
reached.
now, yeah, what
Yes,
has changed now is that information is no longer an elite affair.
social
Everybody
media.
has access to
Yes,
information now. The
yes,
internet has changed the game.
yes. Uh,
So the concept of Pan Africanism used to be very elitist, airy
yes,
fairy concept. Now the person on the streets can understand what it means
to
and
be
why
a
it's
Pan African.
important. Yeah.
Yes.
So that has changed a lot of things
Mm-hmm.
in the way people think. And what I what I predict will happen is that if this continues sweeping across West Africa, eventually it's going to transcend West Africa. It's going to
It
get
will.
to it's going to get to Central Africa as well. When DRC, because that's like in my opinion, if the DRC ever manages to attain some level of stability, I think that's when Africa's story completely changes.
Okay, so let's
I
make that
believe that.
change happen.
I believe once if this wave gets to
Mm-hmm.
Central African Republic, Republic of Congo, then DRC, that is going to be that's going to be like I really hope I'm alive to see it, because that's when I think that the basic parameters of what it means to be African or to be in Africa are going to completely change. Because presently those guys are all sort of, they are still tied up very much in France Afrique. They are still, you know, but when these sort of, these aren't just emotional expressions, these are actual political movements where
Mm-hmm.
there are actual economic goals and the
Mm-hmm.
actual actions that are being taken. Once these things sweep across Francophone West Africa, get to the likes of, Chad, CAR, DRC, even though technically DRC is not part of France Afrique because it was colonized by Belgium, but
Belgians,
but
still the
culture
French
but
speaking.
culturally it still very
Mm-hmm.
much is part of France Afrique.
Mm-hmm.
So but when these changes sweep across from West to Central Africa, that in my opinion is when the story of Africa will completely change. But at that point, even if the Anglophones like Kenya and Nigeria and Ghana are
Mm-hmm.
still playing these games we like to play, when we realize that our neighbors are all starting to engage with each other in a different way and that we are being left out, we too our heads will correct.
I,
We have this abundance mentality, which I think is one of the most dangerous things to have. So when people from a scarcity oriented society meet with
mm-hmm.
people from an abundance oriented society, those from a scarcity oriented society will always win. Because
Yes.
those from the abundance oriented society don't understand the concept of conservation of resources and hoarding and storage of wealth and
Yes.
war, you
Yes.
know. And
Yes.
that's what, so but I'm hopeful that this basic mindset, that animating mindset, is starting to change. I remember I gave a TED talk in 2022 where
Is it
the title of the TED talk was,
Wakanda?
yeah, death 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 to Wakanda. And what I was saying in that TED talk was that mindset that, oh, Africa has so much because it
Mm-hmm.
has gold and lithium and this and crude oil
Mm-hmm.
and all. That's a very defective mentality. That the only thing that gives those resources value is the, what's it called, the industrial economy.
Yes.
So in
Yes.
other
Yes.
words, the places where the factories are, those are the places that give a price to you.
Yes.
So
Yes.
you pay the price that they give you. You are not the one that determines the price. So if you want to, so which means that there is no reason for them to give you any price other than the price that is going to keep you poor.
It's true.
So if you want to rise above poverty, then the production has to start taking place where you are.
With yes.
You
Yes.
have to start adding the value yourself.
Yes.
As long
Yes.
as you have that abundance mentality that I have so much, so all I have to do is just sell resources, and,
Yes.
and then somehow agitate for them to give me a high price for the resources that I'm selling. You're not going to get anywhere.
That
You
is
know.
true. That is true. So for those of us who say we are cocoa coffee producers, yeah, they are the first, second in the world. It is of no value
Yeah,
if you are
Switzerland.
not
Switzerland does not have a single cocoa tree in its borders, and it's the world's largest producer of cocoa.
Swiss chocolate
Yeah.
that are hidden. And that is the critical thing to our mindset revolution. And I hope more of us will become attuned to it.
I think the internet is the game
Mm-hmm.
changer, because when I set out, what I was hoping to achieve within the Nigerian space, if not the West African space, was to make high quality information so available and so
Mm-hmm.
accessible that one way or another, people's mindsets will start to evolve, will start to change,
Mm-hmm.
because there's so much information. I think one of the biggest problems that we had historically was lack of access to information, and the fact that the few people who had information always hoarded it and
Mm-hmm.
used it to create elite societies for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the internet has upended everything. It has changed the game. I can't stress the extent to which the internet has been a lifesaver. It has changed
Mm-hmm.
everything. So now I think it's all connected. These events going on in the Sahel and in West Africa, and
Yes.
then journalists like myself emerging
Mm-hmm.
onto the scene. It's all connected.
Yes.
There's a shift happening.
Yes.
I don't
Yes.
know. I hope I'm alive to see the culmination of this shift. I may or
We
may not
will
be.
be.
Its shift is definitely happening,
We
and
we,
it's
we
happening in
have
front of
to
our eyes.
be. It is.
That's the impression that I get when I travel around Africa in general. When I remember when I was in Kenya, I even though I had obviously followed, I have a lot of Kenyan friends, so I follow a lot of Kenyan content and whatnot. But it's different when you actually spend months in the
Mm-hmm.
country. You actually live, you actually become like a local,
Mm-hmm.
and you are not just in the place where the expats and the foreigners live. You are not in Kilimani.
Yes.
You're in Nairobi, and you get to experience the real energy on the ground. And I realized that there's every, and I don't say this lightly at all. I'm not saying this flippantly. There's every possibility that the country I was in, Kenya, could very well end up being Africa's first properly economically developed country.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If the energy is unmatched,
Yes.
it's there. Like you can tell that if you the because I used to travel around Africa as a child,
Mm-hmm.
so I could compare the people I used to run into then with the people I run into now. It's very
Yes.
different.
It's different.
It's very different. So the people you run into now, everybody is hyper ambitious.
Yes.
Everybody wants to do something and they want to do it where they are.
Yes. Yes.
So the ambition is not, oh, one rich German tourist is going to come and find me and he's going to take me back to Europe. That is not the sense you get at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sense of there's this I want to do, there's this app I want to build, I want to get some funding for this, and there's a job I'm looking for, there's a degree I want to get, there's a boot camp, there's a course. Everybody has something they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
right? That for me is like it's a very easy tell. It's a very
Yes.
easy sign to pick up
Yes.
on. That
Yes.
again, there's a very profound psychological shift that
Mm-hmm.
has happened. I
Mm-hmm.
remember when I was little and we used to travel around the continent. I would go to my favorite place in the world used to be Togo, right? We
Oh.
would yeah, we go to Togo. I used to go to so my oldest sister went to a school called the British School of Lomé.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so we used to go to Togo a lot, and all the major hotels then, Hotel Sarakawa, Hotel de la Paix, which doesn't
Mm-hmm.
exist anymore, unfortunately. Hotel de Février, we used to do like a little tour of these places, and
Yes.
you'd notice back then that whenever you got into contact with a local, if they could speak English and they're interacting with you, even the ones who spoke only French, when they manage to speak a little broken French or interact with them, you'd realize that they were always sort of awed or amazed that why why are you here? Because in their minds, the only people who can afford to be here are white people.
White people. Mm.
So when they see you, you know, and then it almost became a thing that okay, it's probably because they are Nigerians or maybe they have stolen oil money or something. That's the only reason. You don't get that anymore. That doesn't exist anymore. Wherever you are on the continent, that idea that Africans are supposed to be here and other people are here, that idea doesn't exist
There's a
any
change in
longer.
mindset.
It's non-existent. You can't find it
Mm-hmm.
anywhere any longer. Now, if you go to those same places in Togo, the people who were born and raised in Togo have ambitions to holiday in those same places as well. They don't think that there's anything extraordinary about them
Mm-hmm.
occupying those spaces. Previously,
Yes.
that wasn't the case.
Yes. Yes.
So you
Yes.
can tell that even it's not just an anti-French movement.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very sort of simplistic way of looking at it. It's that the entire mental architecture of Africans has changed dramatically over the past
Yeah.
20-25 years. And over
Mm-hmm.
that period, the only thing that I can see that has changed, that has led to this shift, is access to information.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as that information superhighway remains open, as long as with the $20 Android phone, you can have access to the accumulated knowledge of humanity
Yes.
instantly at high speed.
Mm-hmm.
I think in our lifetimes, something special is going to
Amen. You see, my tongue has been colonized.
happen.
David, thank you so much. If we don't come to a conclusion somewhere, you are a man of experience, a man of narratives, and very critical in thought, which I really appreciate, because we need many of our youth, our young people, to be as critical in thought as you are. But most importantly, story. I love stories. The stories we tell ourselves, the countries, the world, influence our perception. And, we've unearthed the narratives that has made you who you are. The narratives that is also, bringing out the unsavory parts of the human condition in Africa, in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Cote d'Ivoire. And hopefully, as we've spoken about, that the wind of change is going to blow, and not yet until it happens.
May it
David, thank
happen.
you so much for saying yes. So where can people find your books, and where can they follow you on all your social media platforms?
Right. So my first book, The Jungle, is
Mhm.
available on Amazon. So if you just go on Amazon and you type The Jungle, then you see it.
Oh, it's not here in the
So
studio.
so the paper cup, the hard copy, the paperback is available on Amazon, but there's no Kindle
Hmm.
version for that one. It's only the paperback. Now my second book,
Hmm.
um, Breaking Points,
Hmm.
is also available on Amazon, but there's no hard copy. It's the Kindle
Kindle
version
version. Yeah.
that is available. If you want the hard copy, you can find it on. Well, there are
Is-
two options. So there's the Indian distributor. They deliver worldwide, but it's a bit expensive to find it there. So it's a distributor called Midland Bookshop. It's
Mhm.
Indian. So they deliver to anywhere in the world. And
Mhm.
then there's a Nigerian distributor called Roving Heights. They also deliver anywhere in the world, but I think they're currently out of stock. So if you need a hard copy desperately, I would recommend going to Midland Bookstore. If you want to follow me, like, or if you want to know where to find me, my
Mhm.
website is davidhundeyin.com.
Mhm.
Um, if you want to speak to me directly, there's like a message box, chat box thing there,
Mhm.
where if you send a message, I'll get an email.
Mhm.
Um, my Twitter and Instagram handles are at David Hundeyin. And
Mhm.
yeah, that's pretty much it.
So much. Thank you.
Thank you for having
Thank
me.
you.